If you're a new Christian or you feel overwhelmed by the Bible, do this when you study. Matthew 11, verse 1. Look at what Jesus says. We're going to learn how to ask questions. When Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, right, if I'm just jumping into this, I might want to ask some questions. What did Jesus just instruct specifically to his 12 disciples? What was it regarding? And if you read chapter 10, it's all about being sent out. He went on from there to teach and to preach in their cities. So what's interesting is it seems as though Jesus is sending his disciples ahead of him into these cities so that when he comes to teach and to preach, those people are ready and prepared for his message and his kingdom. Now, when John heard in prison, now we might want to ask why. Jesus does not have to do this. He can use any other method to prepare people or just go in himself. Why does he involve his disciples? Why does he send them ahead? And what does that emphasize about, Jesus' ministry and the way he relates to his people and how we function as laborers in God's field? Now, when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, we might want to ask, why all of a sudden is John the Baptist being brought up right after Jesus instructs his 12, sends them out, gets ready to preach and teach? After he does that, all of a sudden John the Baptist comes back in. And we have not heard from him for like 7 chapters. So when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, he sent word. And he sends word by his disciples and said to him, to Jesus, "Are you the one who is to come? Or shall we look for another?" Now, what's interesting is right on the heels of Jesus sending his disciples preaching and teaching, John the Baptist seems to have some doubts. Are you the one who is to come? Or shall we look for another? Now, you might read this as doubt. So that's a question we should probably ask. Is John really doubting? Or is there something else going on in this passage that I don't see? Is there a deeper message or strategy that John is employing? When was the last time we saw disciples of John the Baptist? I think it was a few chapters ago, talking about fasting, or maybe even the last chapter. So maybe go parallel that. And Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see." Now, it seems as though John the Baptist might be doubting if, in fact, his messengers have to actually go and tell them what they're experiencing. They have to tell him what they're hearing and what they're seeing. Now, specifically, Jesus says the blind receive their sight. Why is this important to John's little inquiry and the little mission he sends his disciples on? Why is it helpful for John to know, hey, we saw the blind receive their sight, and the lame walk, and the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them? Why does Jesus specifically bring this to their attention? And I'll tell you, this has an Old Testament precedence. You're going to find the basis of this in a prophecy in the Old Testament, and that's important for John understanding who Jesus is even more if he's doubting.